This is an episode of Morning Drives with Marrissa. I've got the voice memo on, and I am heading to get my morning coffee. And I thought it might be a fun practice, both for me, but also just to get the day flowing, I guess. Um, for me to start to just sort of let my thoughts flow in the mornings on my drives. So, let's see, where do I want to begin today? I think the summit has officially closed, and wow, I mean, it was really powerful. There are so many things that I think I'm still processing that I will only be able to reflect on as more of it is further integrated. And I've been in a lot of reflection throughout this whole process, but also just in the last several days. And it's a really interesting dynamic. I think if there's one thing that I can really um, emphasize or has felt emphasized for me this whole time is the full spectrum needed to be able to move out of your comfort zone, which I already knew on some level. But I think whenever you do something that stretches you, you reach greater and greater levels of capacity if you allow yourself and if you have the inner structure within you to be able to expand in that way. And I certainly I rode the roller coaster of everything. This was a big thing for me in the sense that I'm not generally visible. I don't put myself out there to be seen very often. And there's a lot of wounding for me in that throughout my upbringing. And so a part of my own process in life in general has just been understanding that wounding, where it has originated from, and gradually and at my own pace, beginning to move outside of that a little bit more. And the summit actually was a giant leap into that. There were ways that I was sort of doing it where I was sticking my toes in the water, like, for example, starting the podcast and um, joining some other communities that I had joined and trying to put myself out there that way. But wow, whenever I tell you this was a huge leap, it really was. And what I recognized was that had I not spent the time, and when I say time, like, guys, this does not happen in a few weeks. At this point, I'm talking about years of my own inner process. I know we all want to imagine that, like, there's an easy button or there's some exact right process. And if we just find that right process, then we're just going to be able to grow by leaps and bounds. And that's just not realistic. I really wish that the consumerism and capitalism of our culture had not implanted that into our minds, because it's just not accurate. And that doesn't mean that you can't do anything whenever you don't have the fuller inner structure, but it does mean that you have to go through the hard things and you must spend the time to build that inner structure within yourself. One, sometimes for people to even accomplish it. For me, that's the case. It is about, I have had to really build that structure to even be able to continue to expand myself further. There are some people, though, who will expand further before they have the inner structure. And what ends up happening in that is they lose it all, or it all crumbles to the ground because they didn't have something internally holding it up. The way that I choose to move through my own life is actually not to get ahead of myself in that way. Sometimes I'm actually really irritated that I can't just kind of jump ahead and let my body or whatever catch up to it. But I think it's been really important to move at the pace of my own system and by the way, that is unique to everyone. So what I'm saying here doesn't mean that it doesn't have to take, decades or something for every single person. It just means, one, it's definitely not happening in a few weeks. I can tell you that for sure. It is the cultivation of the lifetime of letting yourself be with what is, learn from what is, reflect on what has been, and make the smallest micro fine attunements from there. And sometimes they feel like much bigger attunements. So back to what I was saying, that is what this has felt like for me is, I spent years understanding my own inner world and building what I'm calling the emotional architecture, the infrastructure internally to be able to hold more of the life that I want. That was not modeled to me. And I saw the repetition in my family of origin of, wanting great successes, getting ahead of themselves and not being able to hold it all. So in one way, I think that is also why I've been kind of slow and steady in my own approach. Not that that is the right way for everyone, but it's the right way for me. And in doing so, I've just learned a lot. And so in this process, I recognized had I not spent the time with myself for all of these years, there's absolutely no way I could have continued through this process. It asked a lot of me. And while I am filled with gratitude here at the end, there's certainly exhaustion. I'm not subhuman, and I want to use this as an example of, when people say like, if it's for you, it's a yes, or some imaginatory, like, it should just all be easy. If you're in the flow, it should all feel so smooth. Well, some aspects of it, yes. But the reality is that, especially when you're growing, it requires discomfort to grow. There's no getting around that. Just think about there are so many metaphors I can use, but I'll just imagine first the butterfly example that everyone goes to. Something intuitively in the butterfly, they know that they need to start cocooning themselves. And maybe they don't know they're about to be turned into a puddle of goo, but they certainly know. By the way, if you hear the bumpiness in my voice, it's because I'm on a very bumpy highway. They certainly know that they must go inward, right? And when they do, they are completely turned to mush. And I don't know that they feel that part of it. Obviously, I'm not a butterfly. I don't know. But what I do know, and something that is widespread, is once they start to break out of that chrysalis, once they have reformed in there, they've got their wings, right? Actually, a part of their process is to break out of the chrysalis. And if there is anyone who comes along and goes, oh, look at that struggling butterfly, it's so beautiful, let me help it out of its chrysalis. Unfortunately, that butterfly will not be able to fly, because a part of taking flight for the butterfly is actually the strengthening that comes from the difficulty of coming out, of breaking out of that chrysalis. It's very much the same for us. There isn't an easy button. Everything you do requires the effort. It requires, if you want to expand, it requires stretching. And in order to do that, there's discomfort. There just is discomfort. And that is another thing that I really hope to get across, is that the point of life, I mean, I don't know what the full point of life is necessarily, but one point that I am coming to understand in my own life is that it isn't about some destination that you arrive at or trying to figure out the easiest way. Like, there's going to be some point of arrival where nothing affects you and you're just floating through the air as though everything is so simple. That's not happening, at least here on Earth in this timeline. Maybe there's some utopian dream in a different timeline where that is actually the case. But the reality is, where would our growth be, right? There would be no growth in that state because challenge creates growth if we let it. So all of this to say, this is one little aspect of my experience throughout this process. But I hope that there is recognition then of where this can apply in your own life, that everything that we want to accomplish in life, especially if our vision is big. And I will tell you, my vision is big. I used to really shy away from even being able to say that, to acknowledge it. Not anymore. I do have a big vision. And at this point, it doesn't even matter if I accomplish all of what is in that big vision. What matters is that I hold the vision and that whenever I do that, I can dream something forward. I can dream it into being. And ideally, I bring along people who can help expand that vision and help me understand my blind spots in it and collaborate with me through it. And that is what I hope to impart with you as well. That is a part of what happened throughout this summit. I had some of the most incredible experiences, stories that I certainly will have to reflect on and share as we go along. But the amount of time I felt genuine resonance, and I mean, I couldn't say it in those interviews, but like multiple interviews, at least once in every single one of them. I'm trying to think on that. Yes, definitely. And some of them, it was just so incredibly like multiple times. I had more questions that I wanted to answer. And the moment I would have those questions in my mind, the speaker would begin to talk about that. That is pure resonance when you are attuned to your environment. And that was unconscious. The speaker did not know that I was going to be asking that question. I didn't know where the speaker was going to be going either. But when you live with a degree of really paying attention to your inner world, the insight, what you recognize is that it is intelligent, it's a chicken or the egg. I don't know what happened. Was the speaker going to be talking about that? And so the question came to my mind, or was it that I had that question in my mind? So the speaker began to talk about it. We don't know. What I do know is that in that field of resonance, there was a reason that those specific questions and answers were being brought forward and rising to the surface. And that is the life that I am living right now. That is the message, or a part of the bigger message that I am trying to bring forward. And I think it's just really valuable. I think it's something that more people need to understand, because I think we'd see a very different experience in this world. So if you resonate with that, if that is something that you are interested in understanding as well, please feel free to join my email list where I will be imparting more information. Also, listen to the podcast. This is where I will also be sharing more of those thoughts and collaborating with other beautiful souls that are on this journey of life with us in this very moment in time. And I think it's a really special time to be here and to be doing this work in the world. So thank you for joining me on my very first episode of Morning Drives with Marrissa. And I hope that you have a very lovely day wherever this is finding you in your day. May you be blessed. May you walk in peace. And I will see you next time. Bye for now.